Welcome to Titans of Transition. I'm really pleased to have Suzanne Woods Fisher with me today. She's an award-winning author of over 35 books. In this episode, you'll get sage advice like, hangeth thou in there? How to be okay with small beginnings, but make sure you're ready when the opportunity presents itself. Adopt a disciplined process in your writing. To get published, focus on what the publishers want, what your audience wants. Be committed to improving your craft. Hire an editor. Invest in yourself. Be a lifelong learner. Continue to expand into new areas. These are just a few of the nuggets that Suzanne brings. Now let's get into it. Suzanne Woods Fisher, I'm so happy to welcome you, the best-selling author, award-winning author of over 35 books, fiction, and some non-fiction books as well. Welcome to Titans of Transition.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate you just having me on.
I saw a recent post up on social of your latest book. So can you just take a minute and just tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a fun book called The Sweet Life, and it's a contemporary fiction. So it's first of a series, and it's a story about a mom and a daughter who kind of need a fresh start, both for different reasons. And they end up on Cape Cod, and they're very opposite personalities. And the mom ends up on a walk, seeing this rundown old ice cream shop up for sale, and puts in a low bid offer, which gets accepted. And her daughter, who is a CPA, you can see the different personalities right there, is horrified and has to figure out how to make this work. And so that's kind of the crux of the story, is the relationship between these two very different personalities and without spoiling it in any way, their differences become their greatest strength. So it's a really lovely story of healing and wholeness and new adventures.
Is that for sale right now? Is it up?
Yes,
ready?
it released in early May.
Oh, great.
And it's been doing really well. And like I mentioned, it's the first in a series. So it's a fun one. Everybody loves ice cream. Who doesn't love ice cream?
Yeah, well, I know you and your husband love making ice cream. Interestingly enough, he was in the finance area for his career, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So that's great. Hey, listen, I want to kind of dive right in and talk to you about some things that I think probably folks who have found this podcast episode, I would think a good collection of them would be writers or aspiring writers. So it's a really tough business. And it's always great to ask someone who has been on the other side of the challenges of rejection and all the other challenges of getting published about your start. And I think when we talked before the recording session a week or two ago, I remember this phrase you said, I love small beginnings. And I think it ties into this question. So can you tell us about that? How did you break through?
Well, and the publishing world is really one of the hardest you could ever hope to break through. And I don't say that with any sense of trying to discourage anybody, as much as just give you a realistic perspective, because you need such a thick skin, and it is not a world that is looking for you. In fact, if anything, they're really looking to see why you don't have a place in this world. So it is hard. And I think as long as everybody understands that, as they move forward, it kind of empowers you a little bit to kind of get ready for the long haul. This is most likely not going to be an easy road ahead. With that, I was a writer of magazines for many, many years while I was raising kids. I was a freelance writer, and I kind of really honed my nonfiction writing skills in that, which I think is so important. And then later, as my kids had off to college, I decided to try a novel. And as I look back now, the reason I bring that up is because all of those nonfiction skills really gave me a lot of credibility in my fiction writing, because I always want to have a book that you end up learning things. You're not doubting the history of it or the depth of research. And then I also think flip that around, and I feel like my fiction writing then really jazzed up my nonfiction skills. So I always
Oh,
encourage people to not box themselves up, that there's lots of opportunity, and writing is writing, and good writing is good writing. And so I went into trying to get this novel pitched. And here I'd had probably 15 to 20 years or more developing relationships. I had a name sort of out there. I mean, not any big name, but just I had, credits to my name. And it was so hard.
mm,
It was so hard. I got so close in some larger publishing houses, and then it would slip away. And I ended up with an offer from a small royalty press. And for me, that was a great small beginning. It was just ideal. And part of the reason is I was a not really a big fish, but I was a fish in a little pond. And I had to learn so much about the business side of writing, which is half the thing. It
mm.
is, if you want more than one book out there, it is a business, and you have to understand what the publishing world is looking for, and how to find your audience, how to keep going. And because I was in this small royalty press that obviously didn't have the distribution system that a larger publishing house does, I had to do it myself. And I had a wonderful book. They did a great job, but I had to, I'd submit it for awards myself. I had to
Okay, so
call
that was a
bookstores.
question that I did have, as I wasn't familiar with this term small royalty press and how it's different. So it's you do more of the work. I guess that's part of it.
Yeah, but it is royalty payment, so
Royalty
it's
payments.
not a self-publishing situation. It's they
Oh yeah,
they
yeah.
really own the copyright. They have the cover design, they have the editing, all that.
Okay.
But it was just such a good small beginning. I mean, I think I just got over my fear of public speaking. I had to, and cold calling, and just putting yourself out there. It won some awards. Those awards ended up winning the attention of an agent, because I'd been rejected by all the agents as well. And then that just opened the door to writing for Revell Books, which is where I really have had 35 some books published, which is quite unusual. Most
Mm.
people are not at one house for such a long time. And I feel very blessed to have this great relationship with Revell. But I guess, to answer your question, I think small beginnings are a wonderful start. I think there's a verse in Zephaniah about the Lord delights in small beginnings that
Yeah.
is true for me.
Yeah.
And I encourage others to not disdain them.
Did you feel like you were ready? I mean, you made this shift, and we haven't talked about some other questions around the shift yet, but did you feel like you were ready for that whole thing of being a published author and all the other things that go along with it at the time?
That's a wonderful question, because I do believe in the idea that there is a time for all things. And I feel so thankful that that door opened for me as my major child raising time of life came to an adjustment, as they all went to college, and
Mm.
certainly you're letting go and the nest is empty, because it can be so consuming, and it is um, hard to, especially when you work from home, really hard to have boundaries.
Boundaries. Yeah.
And I think the fiction world you walk into when you're writing, and you almost dive deep, and it's hard to kind of come out. You need a lot of time alone. I go to sometimes these award ceremonies or writers conferences, and there's especially like young moms who are so hungry.
Mm.
They're so hungry. And when I remember one time when I heard this woman, she'd won an award. She's obviously a talented writer. That's not the doubt. It's really just the timing. And her thank you was to her husband, her mother-in-law, and her mother for taking care of her children so she could write. And I just thought, she's never going to get that back. She's going to get the writing time back, but she's never going to get those children
Well,
when they're
that's
little back.
that's so true. Did you make a deliberate choice to wait before putting a novel out there until your kids had left the house, so you were empty nested, or was it circumstance? Did it just happen that way?
I think for me, which is kind of a good point, because maybe I would feel differently if I'd had the door open at 22 or 25.
Mhm.
So I don't mean to sound like I I'm giving people advice as much as I'm thankful for how it worked for me. But we've been living in Hong Kong, and we were there for 4 years, and the internet was young. It was in the late 90s. And I'd been writing even magazines. I was able to continue writing. But when we came back, that was when I had a little bit more space in my life. And that was when kids were heading to college. And actually, my dad was even starting to show signs of Alzheimer's. And it was beginning to be sort of that personal time of life where I just kind of pulled back a bit. And I didn't get quite as involved in things as I did a few years later. It's just like a little bit of a breathing space. And that's what opened the idea of writing a novel. So
Yeah, wow, what a story. Obviously, writing, I'm going to say, is your gift. And did you recognize that this was something you wanted to do from a very early age? Was it something?
yes,
I'm going to be a
loved
writer, or
writing. I really loved it. I loved reading. I loved writing. Always a strength. I would not say it's a talent for me.
oh, that's
I wouldn't
interesting.
say it's a gift. I think it's something and I have to be honest, I don't remember any comment from a parent or
Was
teaching that I
There
was
was no
particularly.
moment where you said, that's for me.
There was for
Okay,
me,
good.
but it wasn't affirmed. It wasn't like
Oh, I
guided.
see.
It really came from inside. And so for me, it's a craft. And I really work hard at the craftsmanship of writing. And I want every book better than the one before. And so far that I think my editors have said they made a comment the other day that they haven't seen that in a lot of writers, that each book is getting tighter and cleaner.
Okay, so
And
let's talk a little bit about that. So you feel like you've grown, obviously, as a writer over time. In what aspects, you mentioned one, it's tighter. I'm not sure what that means exactly. So, what do you mean by that? And
well, for example, let's take the ending of a chapter.
okay,
And it is a real skill to end a chapter in a fiction book where the writer is on her or his toes, eager to go forward. Can't put it down
you
because
leave
what's
them
going to
wanting
happen
for the
next?
next chapter.
Yeah. And now that I've said that to you, you'll notice that moment where some writers leave you on your heels,
Mhm.
where it's a good point to stop, put the book away. You don't want that. You want them on their toes, leaning,
Yeah.
and things like that. Those little, and I don't mean to make that little because that's a skill that takes time and effort, and where to cut that chapter in, where to put it, and to start the new one. And timing is another thing. It is astounding how complicated it can be to be paying attention to your timing in a novel and little details that you can mix up so easily. And that's another one. I think story arc, how quickly you dive into that first chapter. Does that just leave you, really wanting to know how is this going to end?
And the other thing I've heard of before is character development. And do you keep the same characters over sort of a series, or, like you just said, you were publishing it. This book you just published was part of it.
Yeah, the first in the
Yeah.
series. Well, so when you have a series, like a
Yeah.
three-book series
Yeah.
is generally how the novels go. There is a large story arc that goes from beginning to end. And that has to kind of stay in view. But I think each book concludes its
Stands
own
on its own.
story. So a lot of times characters, we've got them happily in love
Mhm.
or, off scene or something like that. So I think secondary characters come in that might have a question that you're trying to answer in the book. That's sort of how it goes. Though there's still, what the fun of it is, it's a familiar stage. It's like characters come on and off, and if you enjoyed them in book one, you'll see them again in book three
Yeah.
or something like that. But I do think each book needs to stand on its own two legs. Like, I don't like the feeling, I've read books where I feel like book two is half of book one against to get you up to speed and prepping you for book three, and
So the other
I like
part
to
of the
have a complete
planning
story.
and the skill you probably have developed over time is when you do these series, you do have to have a framework at least of where it's going to end to make sure things tie out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, listen, one of the things that's kind of curious is it's a question I have is how did you choose sort of the Amish people as sort of a focal point for many of these novels?
Well, interestingly enough, my grandfather was raised
Oh,
Maine. He was one of 11 children back near on a farm called Sleepy Hollow near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And he was actually German Baptist, which is you would you would see them on the street and think they look Amish, and they have the same theology of
hmm.
Anabaptists, where they are baptized as adults, but they actually have differing philosophies in and lifestyle. For example, the German Baptists would not have a radio or television or computer in their home, but they would drive in a car and they would fly on an airplane. Older Amish are horse and buggy. They live isolated off the grid. They're more recognizable in this day and age, but they have a lot in common, quite a lot. The heritage, which came, 400 or 500 years ago with Menno Simons and that is why the Mennonites were sort of first on the Anabaptist tree. And then from that, if you think of it, I mean, they're Protestants, so I don't mean to make it sound like it's different from other denominations, but if we just look at the Anabaptists, you have the Mennonites, you have then the Hutterites, you have the River Brethren and the Apostolic Brethren, and on and on. And then late, the last one are the Amish. They came in I think 1696 with Jacob Amen, who he introduced the concept of shunning, where someone they're under church discipline and they're actually like left out of the fold until they repent. Only the Amish shun, just a side note. But back to just my grandfather, I've always had an interest in my cousins. I'm, as you can imagine, a lot of cousins. In fact, there's a large German Baptist colony in Modesto. And so we've gone visiting and back and forth. And I think I had a sincere interest. My agent knew of my connection. And when she knew that Revell was looking for an author who had an interest in the Amish, they connected
Oh,
me. And it actually started with a nonfiction book called Amish Peace, Simple Wisdom for a Complicated World, that was a great foundation book for me to then write Amish fiction. But that is
that's
my
really
thing. And
interesting.
one thing I want to say, I really try to write, the Amish fiction is a huge genre, very, very popular. I think when I started writing, there were maybe 8 to 10 authors, and last count, which was years ago, there were
Wow, I
86.
was not aware
So
of
it
that.
is a
That's wild.
flooded field and it's not one that's going to drop in like a flash. It is a consistently held strong. It's always on the bestseller list. You'll see 4 or 5 Amish authors. And the thing I feel strongly about is I try to write about the older Amish, where you look past the bunnies and bonnets and beards to see why are they the way they
Yeah.
are. What really differs, or what do we have to learn from them without going Amish? So anyway, that's very long answer to one question.
It's extremely interesting, and it kind of underscores as you were going through that and unpacking your knowledge around that tie to your family. You made a comment earlier about the research that you have to do to as a
Mhm.
writer, and I think there's a lot of things people who are just readers, consumers, don't fully appreciate. Maybe some of your friends might not even appreciate about how hard it is, how much work it takes. When you talk about research, I think of the crazy research that like James Michener used to do on his novels. Um, there's a lot of work and that you have to do to be, I don't know if credible is the right word, but to bring a credible story and it to life, isn't there?
I really think that is what makes an author stand out when they go to a place, when they are studying. I think especially some of the historical fiction I've written, there are little museums in these tiny little towns where you're going to find books that you're not going to find on Amazon. You're in just local history pamphlets, things like that, where you just are on site and you're getting a sense of what the air
Hmm.
feels like and what the trees are like and the
Then
hills
you can
and
start painting that picture with words in
mhm,
3D, so to
even
speak.
food.
Yeah. Um,
Not
I think another
great.
question that folks listening to this may have is what's your process? I've heard stories about writers who have a particular process they follow, rain or shine, or other people who might not be that tight in their I'm just kind of curious about your process for writing.
Well, there's kind of two schools of thought about writing. There's sort of they call it the seat of the pantser, where you're putting it together. You're throwing it like spaghetti at the wall to stick, and then there's the people that outline. And I have one friend who's a phenomenal author, and she spends 3 weeks outlining every scene, every point of view change, every detail in almost a spreadsheet.
Wow.
3 weeks. And then she spends 3 weeks writing a novel.
Only 3.
And it is just boom. But well, 6 weeks altogether, but very focused, intentional, probably no surprises as she's writing. She's just filling that out, But for me, I follow a process where I actually am very disciplined in my daily writing. And we had talked about something called the 20-mile march, which is something I really encourage writers to think about, because it gives you it corrects a lot of thinking. So it goes back to this early in the turn of the century, the race to the South Pole. And we had an Englishman named Scott, and we had a Norwegian named Amundsen, and they both had different strategies to get to the same place. They started at the same place. They wanted to get there first, but they were going from a different starting point. And so the Englishman, his belief was they would go as far as they could when the conditions were right. And when conditions were bad, they would stop, they would rest, they would mend their tents, they would kind of prepare, and then wait again for conditions. And then the Norwegian had this concept of 50 to 20 miles a day, rain or shine, no matter what, snow or hail. And he even got to within, I think, just a few miles of the South Pole. And he made his troops stop. He made his team stop, even though they were so close, and waited till the next day. So like, even with that kind of pressure, he did not push them. His theory was, you do not exhaust people, you keep moving. Well, I think writers would probably pick the Englishman style, because you wait for what they call the muse. You wait for inspiration to hit. You wait for conditions to hit. And frankly, that doesn't work terribly well. And the end of that story is that the Norwegian made it there and back with every single member of the team, whole and healthy and well. The Englishman did make it back a little after, got then on the return trip within 11 miles of a cache of food, and they all perished. It's a dramatic story. And I don't want to simplify it, because it's not exactly the same thing, but it is true that there's the discipline of every day getting to your desk. It may not always be brilliant, but it is putting you in the frame of mind that you are in your story. I mentioned timing earlier. I think a lot of that gets lost when you step away for a few days. You've forgotten you've already gone through that scene, and there's just something about that steady forward marching. Sometimes it's not great writing, but it is moving the plot forward. So I really encourage people to kind of have a discipline in that. That doesn't mean I do write a little bit of like throwing spaghetti on the wall. I'm not as organized as my friend, but the fun of that is that surprises happen along the way, which I kind of enjoy.
Yeah, but the foundation is this kind of disciplined showing up.
Take it seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. There's some real wisdom there. And I see it applying in other areas and other careers as well. Kind of reminds me a little bit like Aesop's fable, except I don't want to say slow and steady, Yeah.
In the hair kind of thing. Yeah.
I have a reminder of that.
Yeah.
We talked about how you've grown as a novelist over the years.
Well, I've expanded into different genres, which is really fun. Like doing historical fiction is one of my favorite, and love that. And I actually just had, in fact, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I just had 2 novels optioned for film, one of which is A Sweet Life. And then, I know I'm really excited. And then the other one is the Moonlight School, which is a story about a true story based on a woman named Cora Wilson Stewart, who was a superintendent of education in Eastern Kentucky in Appalachia. And she had this idea of opening the schoolhouses. She had about 51 or 52 little rural schoolhouses way up in the hills and the hollows. And she knew she had a very high adult illiteracy rate in her county. And the thinking of the day was that adults couldn't learn to read and write. It was sort of a window. It opened as a child, and when it closed, it was closed. But she pushed that, opened the schoolhouses on moonlit nights for obvious reasons, because that was the only way they could find their way to the schoolhouse. And she hoped maybe 100 to 150 people would come in these 51 schoolhouses. And 1,200 people came out that first night and filled the schoolhouses. And in 2 years, she wiped out adult illiteracy in her county. And then the Moonlight School concept spread throughout the South. And then that is sort of what we know as
Do you
night
recall the
school. So
county?
it's just the
Oh, okay.
Rowan
I
County,
went to school in
Rowan.
Kentucky. I was just kind of curious. Southeastern Kentucky,
We know
a
that.
small Southern Baptist College, Cumberland College, Williamsburg. Yeah.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Wow. So let me ask you this question. What advice would you give to someone who's starting out to write based on your experiences?
Well, I think the best advice is hang it thou in there.
Hang a thou in there.
Don't give up on that. Just
Yeah.
keep going. And if you have a dream, I think there's many wonderful books still to be written, and your voice is needed. But just keep working on your craft, keep pursuing, keep learning, keep understanding the business of writing. Go to these writers' conferences. Learn what the industry is looking for. That's half of the battle. It's finding where is the need, and then seeing if you can adjust to that, and developing relationships, learning how to just handle the whole social media monster, which is going to be part of your life, and the balance of that. And but mainly hang it down in there. Like don't get stopped easily. Don't read the reviews. Don't just this is between you and the Lord and
Yeah.
God. And
Wow. It strikes me that people have goals of trying to, get through this, to break through, have this next step of becoming published. And obviously all their energies are trying to work on their creative work and make sure it's picked up. But maybe they might not be ready if it is. And maybe they might not even know what it means. And we talked a little bit about this already, to be a published author, all the marketing time and all the social media, like you just said. Any advice around that? Or is there any way that they can prepare? Do you think it's premature to prepare for that? I don't know. It seems to me you could almost blow it after you published your first book and then just sort of dissolve because maybe you weren't a good partner with your publisher after that.
well, I think if you let too much kind of stop you with that idea of readiness, you're never gonna get going.
You get
And
paralyzed.
yeah, and that I think is a problem for so many writers. I have a college friend who actually is the one who got me writing together with her on our college newspaper, and then she helped me get started with freelancing later. And she can write circles around me. She is so incredibly talented, but to get to a finish line, she just can't seem to get it finished. She has ideas, but it doesn't. So I think that's so common in writers, that they have to keep polishing and polishing and polishing. And
Perfectionism.
well, it's perfectionism, and there's a point of, yeah, it's got to be your best work, and it could probably always be better. But if you know too much, you're not gonna. You got to get there. I think allow yourself a
You
margin.
got to start somewhere.
Well, and
Start
allow
small.
yourself a margin of mistakes. I think is going to hopefully improve as you grow in this and learn more. I'm still learning so much. I just came back from my publishing house back in Michigan, where they had an authors event, and they brought a marketing person in to just give us ideas. And I'm still kind of reeling with, I could do so much more. So I think have the humility to be a lifelong learner.
Oh, I love that. That is such a good statement, to be a lifelong learner, but have the humility to do it. And then tying back to hangeth thou in there, another question someone actually gave to me to give to you is, what advice do you have to someone who has been writing for years but hasn't broken through? Maybe they haven't, they're trying to get an agent, they haven't got an agent, or they're trying to get published and they never have quite gotten there. It's like you said, it's a tough business. And yeah, I don't know I mean, are there pieces of advice you could offer a person like that?
Is this for fiction writing in particular, for example?
Yeah, this one's
So
fiction.
there's a couple of other options, which there's one couple of organizations where you can almost sign up and they're working with you on your novel. So they're actually coaching, helping you to get this published, get this into better shape. So that's like one idea, is to almost think, okay, I'm stuck here. I'm not making any headway. So let me look at what I can, who can help me
Mhm.
get this into a better condition. Paying for an editor is always a good idea as well, because there could be some things that are really, you're too close to it, missing. I think also if you pursue the idea of self-publishing, which is not a bad option, a lot of people do
Mhm.
it, but get a good editor, pay for it, pay for a good cover. Don't cheat yourself there, and
Mhm.
make sure what you put out there is really clean and the best of your ability.
And I suppose a good editor that you would contract with would be someone who's that same class of editor that the publishing houses would
Yeah,
use. It wouldn't be
you pay
like
for
my friend who seems to be a good editor.
you pay for it though. I mean, you
Yeah, pay
have
for
to
it.
be
Yeah.
willing to kind of invest in yourself in that. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and I do know a lot of people who have started with self-publishing and they have done it well, and that has gotten them in the door for now, moving into traditional publishing house. That doesn't have to be the goal. There's a lot of traditional publishing house people who now are self-publishing because they just feel like they know it well enough. They can do it. The distribution is theirs. They can do it, the ebooks. Um, I've noticed also award ceremonies are now permitting self-publishing in the awards. So it's not a bad
That's
option,
nice.
but just
Yeah.
do it well. Don't think you don't need more eyes on that work. Everybody needs an editor.
Yeah.
Editors need editors. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. So at this point, the only other thing I wanted to sort of bring out is that I often ask, I've already asked in essence, what would your advice be for your 25-year-old self? We kind of did that already, a starting out kind of question. But my question for you, do you think there was, and I'm going to go back to this again, was there any particular aha moment that sticks in your mind across your career where things really made a shift?
well, I think there's something I would call readiness meets opportunity. So when you look back, I was working as a writer,
Yeah.
and then I didn't give up, and I kept kind of pushing, and it wasn't overnight, and it wasn't a straight line, but when the door opened, it really opened, and I couldn't have engineered that. There's a little bit of just like God's goodness in when the time is right, the time is right.
Mm-hmm.
So but I really believe in readiness meets opportunity. Like that's within my control, the readiness.
Couple those two things together. Yeah.
Yeah, and be hopeful
That's powerful.
and trustworthy.
Yeah.
That when the time is right, you're ready to go.
That's great.
But like I said,
Hey,
it's not a
listen,
straight
as we
line.
come,
It's not a straight line. No, even now, it's still ups and downs.
so as we kind of wrap up, obviously people can find your work, your books, anywhere, Amazon, wherever they typically buy their books. Um, do you have a website that I can put in the show notes? And what would that
I
address be?
really enjoy connecting with readers. I feel that's one of the main best parts of this whole experience is connecting with people. I mean, I type in a laundry room. This is my laundry room. It's an isolated, like, fit away. And I feel so thankful when I do hear from people, when I get feedback, when there's just people who want you to know they enjoyed a book or a character or what's happening next or something. And so I try to really, how would I call it, water my subscribers well. And I have a newsletter
Yeah.
with a lot of like first peeks at covers or contests or things like that. So if you go to my website, www.suzannewoodsfisher.com, there's a contact page, and that's the best way to get through to me. And I try to answer back within 24 hours, but there's a lot of info on the website as well if you're looking for books or things like that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne, for coming on Titans of Transition. This has been very interesting. Writing is not my gift. I can write, but I wouldn't lead with that. That's for sure. And people know me would definitely agree with that. But anyway, it's been a real pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your time. And I just encourage everyone who's listening to this to go check out Suzanne's work. She has quite a following.
Thank you.
So thanks again.
Joe. Take care.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.